The blue marble hung in the void of space like a forgotten jewel, its surface swirling with white clouds and vast oceans. Ambassador Roth adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus as his ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the heat shields glowing orange against the alien sky. He had traveled across 12 star systems to reach this unremarkable world, driven by desperation rather than hope. Behind him in the observation deck, his aide Myra shuffled through data tablets with six-fingered hands, her scaled skin reflecting the pale light of Earth's single moon. The information they possessed about humanity was sparse and largely theoretical. A species that had achieved global unity after centuries of warfare, now living in apparent harmony across their single world. It seemed almost too convenient, too perfect for what the Alliance needed. The Altran diplomat had seen countless species rise and fall during his 3 centuries of service. Most civilizations followed predictable patterns: expansion, conflict, resolution, and eventually stagnation. But Earth's trajectory puzzled him. The humans had developed nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, yet had somehow stepped back from the brink of extinction. They had fought wars that claimed millions of lives, then formed international bodies to prevent future conflicts. It was either the work of a remarkably mature species or incredible luck. Dr. Thane's report flickered on the main display as Roth reviewed it one final time. The xenobiologist had spent months studying human broadcasts, analyzing their cultural development and monitoring their technological progress. His conclusion was simple. Humans possessed an unusual combination of aggression and cooperation that might provide fresh perspective on the Dominion crisis. The Alliance Council had approved the mission with barely concealed skepticism, but they were running out of options. The ship touched down in a grassy field outside Geneva, Switzerland, where the United Nations had prepared a welcoming ceremony. Roth stepped onto the alien soil, feeling the strange sensation of natural gravity after months in artificial fields. The air tasted different here, rich with oxygen and organic compounds that made his breathing apparatus work harder than usual. Humans had gathered in small groups around the landing site, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity and excitement rather than the fear most species displayed during first contact. Secretary General Adams approached with measured steps, her gray hair catching the morning sunlight. She had been briefed on basic Alliance protocols, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of meeting beings from another world. Behind her walked General Torres, a woman whose steady gaze suggested she had seen enough conflict to remain calm in any situation. The military advisor carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned respect through action rather than words. "Welcome to Earth," Adams said, her voice carrying across the field through translation. "Devices, we are honored by your presence and grateful for this opportunity to join the galactic community." Roth found himself surprised by the formality of the greeting. Most species approached first contact with either excessive ceremony or barely contained terror. These humans seemed to treat it as a diplomatic meeting between equals, despite the obvious technological gap. It was either remarkable composure or dangerous ignorance. The briefing took place in a conference room that had been hastily modified with Alliance-compatible seating and atmospheric controls. Roth spread holographic displays showing the current state of galactic politics, explaining the delicate balance that had maintained peace for 3 millennia. The Alliance represented 12 species spanning 47 star systems, each with their own cultures, technologies, and approaches to conflict resolution. "The Dominion Empire has existed alongside us for over 1,000 years, Roth explained, his words translated into various human languages simultaneously. "They are a militaristic society that values strength above all else, but they have respected our boundaries and maintained trade relationships. Recently, however, their new leadership has become increasingly aggressive." General Torres leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "What changed? New resources discovered? Leadership succession? Economic pressure?" The question caught Roth off guard. Most species asked about the Dominion's military capabilities or territorial ambitions. This human immediately sought to understand the underlying causes of the conflict. It suggested a mind that approached problems systematically rather than reactively. We believe their expansion into the Outer Rim has brought them into contact with several primitive species, Roth replied. Easy conquests may have encouraged their leadership to test our resolve. They have begun making territorial demands and threatening our border worlds. Adams nodded slowly. And you want Earth to help mediate this dispute? Your species has achieved something remarkable, Roth said, calling up displays of Earth's history. You have survived global warfare, developed weapons of mass destruction, and yet found ways to maintain peace. The Alliance Council believes your perspective might offer solutions we have not considered. The human delegation exchanged glances that Roth could not interpret. There was something in their expressions that suggested they found his assessment amusing or perhaps naive. It was the first hint that the Alliance might not fully understand what they were inviting into their ancient confederation. What exactly would our participation involve? Torres asked. Cultural exchange, primarily, Roth replied. Share your methods of conflict resolution, provide fresh perspectives on diplomatic approaches, perhaps serve as neutral mediators in negotiations. The Alliance has protocols for integrating new species gradually, with full membership following a probationary period. The offer was generous by galactic standards. Most species waited centuries before being invited to join the Alliance and even then faced extensive evaluation periods. Earth was being offered immediate provisional membership based solely on theoretical potential. Adams stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful landscape beyond. We would be honored to accept your invitation, Ambassador Roth. Humanity has long dreamed of joining a galactic community, and we believe we can contribute meaningfully to your peace efforts. The formal acceptance ceremony took place 3 days later, broadcast across both Earth and Alliance worlds. Roth watched as human representatives signed documents written in 12 different languages, committing their species to the principles of galactic cooperation. The Alliance provided immediate technological assistance, quantum communication arrays, defensive shield generators, and basic faster-than-light travel capabilities. As the human ships prepared for departure to Concordia, Roth found himself wondering if the Alliance Council had made the right decision. There was something about these humans that he could not quite identify, a quality that seemed to exist beneath their civilized surface. They approached problems with an intensity that suggested they understood conflict more deeply than their peaceful world would indicate. The blue marble grew smaller in the viewports as the combined fleet entered hyperspace, carrying humanity toward its first encounter with the broader galaxy. Neither the Alliance nor Earth fully understood what they had set in motion. But across the stars, the Dominion Empire continued its preparations for war, unaware that the balance of power was about to shift in ways no one could predict. The city of Concordia stretched across the horizon like a living organism, its towers reaching toward the purple sky of the Alliance capital world. Dr. Alex Reed pressed his face against the transport window, watching as buildings from a dozen different architectural traditions blended seamlessly into a single urban landscape. Crystalline spires from the Altrian districts reflected the light of twin suns, while the geometric structures of the Vorthek quarters demonstrated mathematical precision that hurt to look at directly. The human delegation had been traveling for 6 days through hyperspace, their first experience with faster-than-light travel leaving most of them slightly disoriented. General Torres had adapted quickly, spending hours studying Alliance military protocols and fleet formations. Secretary General Adams focused on diplomatic procedures and cultural customs. But Reed found himself fascinated by the historical records, particularly the way different species had approached conflict throughout their development. Their escort, a young Nethri named Historian Mirren, guided them through the cultural district with obvious pride. The Nethri resembled tall, slender humans with elongated skulls and skin that shifted color based on emotional states. Mirren's skin showed warm golden tones, indicating pleasure and excitement at sharing her world with newcomers. The Alliance has maintained peace for 3,214 years, she explained, her musical voice carrying through translation devices. Each species contributes according to their strengths. The Altrians provide diplomatic expertise. The Vorthak offer computational analysis, and the Nethri serve as historians and cultural preservers. Reed noticed that she did not mention what role humans were expected to fill. The Alliance seemed to view Earth as a source of philosophical wisdom rather than practical contribution. It was a misconception he suspected would not last long. The cultural exchange sessions took place in the Grand Assembly, a massive amphitheater that could accommodate representatives from all Alliance species simultaneously. Prime Kella of the Altrians served as the primary host, her transparent blue skin glowing softly as she welcomed the human delegation. The Altrians were natural diplomats, their biology allowing them to sense emotional states in other species and adjust their communication accordingly. "We are most curious about your methods of achieving planetary unity," Prime Kella said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested genuine interest. "The historical records indicate that your species experienced significant conflict before reaching its current peaceful state." Adams had prepared for this question, but Reed found himself standing before she could respond. "Perhaps it would be helpful to provide some context about human historical development," he said, calling up holographic displays of Earth's timeline. The first session began with prehistoric human migration patterns and the development of early civilizations. The Alliance representatives listened politely as Reed described the rise of agriculture, the formation of city-states, and the gradual expansion of human populations across continents. It all seemed familiar to species that had followed similar developmental paths. Then Reed reached the section on organized warfare. "The first recorded battle took place approximately 5,000 years ago," he explained, showing formations of ancient soldiers. As human populations grew and resources became scarce, different groups began competing for territory and resources. This led to the development of military tactics and strategies. The displays showed the evolution of human warfare, from simple clubs and spears to complex siege engines, from individual combat to coordinated army movements. The Alliance representatives shifted uncomfortably as Reed described concepts like flanking maneuvers, supply line disruption, and psychological warfare. Strategist Vex Prime of the Vorthak interrupted with clicking sounds that indicated confusion. "These conflicts appear to involve deliberate harm to members of your own species. Was this not considered counterproductive to overall survival?" Reed paused, considering how to explain concepts that seemed obvious to humans but apparently alien to species that had evolved different approaches to conflict. Human survival often depended on competition for limited resources. Those who could fight effectively were more likely to survive and reproduce. Over time, this led to increasingly sophisticated military thinking. The second session focused on major historical conflicts, and Reed found himself in the uncomfortable position of describing humanity's capacity for violence to beings who had never experienced anything comparable. He showed them the tactics of ancient Rome, the strategic innovations of medieval Europe, and the industrial warfare of the modern era. World War I involved over 70 million military personnel, he explained, showing maps of battlefield deployments. The conflict introduced concepts like trench warfare, chemical weapons, and coordinated artillery bombardments. It was followed 20 years later by an even larger conflict. Prime Kayla's skin had shifted to darker blue, indicating distress. "Your species engaged in conflicts that killed millions of your own people? How did you survive such losses?" "We learned from each conflict," Reed replied simply. "Every war taught us new lessons about logistics, strategy, and the importance of adapting to changing circumstances. The species that emerged from these conflicts was stronger, more unified, and better prepared for future challenges." The third session covered modern warfare and the path to global peace. Reed described the development of nuclear weapons, the Cold War's strategic balance, and the gradual realization that total war would result in mutual extinction. He explained how humans had channeled their competitive instincts into economics, sports, and space exploration. General Torres joined the discussion, providing details about contemporary military doctrine and defensive strategies. Modern human. Military thinking emphasizes rapid response, flexible tactics, and the ability to adapt to unexpected situations. We train for scenarios ranging from conventional warfare to asymmetric conflicts. The Alliance representative seemed particularly disturbed by her casual mention of backup plans for planetary defense. Most species had never considered the possibility of their homeworld being attacked, while humans had developed detailed protocols for defending Earth against various theoretical threats. "You maintain military forces even in peacetime?" asked Commander Zenth of the Alliance Defense Force. "Peace is not the absence of conflict," Torres replied. "It is the presence of justice and the capability to defend it. Our military exists to ensure that peace remains possible." By the end of the week, the cultural exchange had produced unexpected results. The Alliance representatives had gained a troubling understanding of human military potential, while the humans had begun to grasp the truly peaceful nature of Alliance civilization. Neither side was entirely comfortable with what they had learned. In private meetings with the Alliance Council, concerns were raised about humanity's militaristic background. Some members questioned whether inviting such a warlike species into their peaceful confederation had been wise. Others argued that humanity's experience with conflict might prove valuable if the Dominion situation continued to deteriorate. Reed found himself in conversation with historian Mirren after the final session. The Nethri skin showed complex patterns of confusion and fascination as she processed what she had learned about human development. "Your species has survived things that would have destroyed most civilizations," she said quietly. "How do you live with such knowledge? How do you trust each other after such history?" "We remember," Reed replied. "We remember what we are capable of, both good and bad. That knowledge makes us careful about our choices and grateful for our peace." Unknown to the Alliance, Dominion intelligence networks had been monitoring the cultural exchange sessions. War leader Karn dismissed the human presentations as primitive barbarism, but his intelligence officer Dex had begun to recognize patterns that suggested something far more dangerous than simple savagery. As the human delegation prepared to extend their stay at Concordia, communications from the Outer Rim brought news that would change everything. The Dominion Empire had begun massing fleets near Alliance border worlds, and their diplomatic messages had taken on an increasingly aggressive tone. The Alliance had invited Earth to help solve their peace problem, but as reports of Dominion military movements reached Concordia, it became clear that the galaxy's long era of stability was about to end. The question remained whether humanity's unique experience with conflict would prove to be salvation or catastrophe for the ancient Alliance. The emergency beacon screamed through the quantum communication network at 0347 hours, ship time. General Torres had been reviewing Alliance defensive protocols when the alert shattered the quiet of the night cycle aboard the human quarters at Concordia. The message was brief and devastating. 3 Alliance border worlds had gone silent within the same hour. Their automated distress signals cut off mid-transmission. Fleet Admiral Zenth's voice crackled through the communicators, his usual calm replaced by barely controlled panic. "All Alliance representatives report to the Emergency Council chamber immediately. We have confirmation of hostile action against our outer territories." Torres grabbed her datapad and rushed through the corridors of the Alliance complex, passing other delegates who moved with the slow, methodical pace of beings unused to crisis. The Altrians maintained their diplomatic composure, their skin colors shifting to deeper blues that indicated concern. The Vorthak calculated probability matrices as they walked, their mechanical thought processes struggling to accommodate the reality of sudden warfare. The emergency council chamber buzzed with activity as holographic displays showed the current situation across Alliance space. 3 star systems had been attacked simultaneously. Kepler Station, a mining colony with 12 million inhabitants. New Harmony, an agricultural world that fed 6 neighboring systems. And Outpost 7, a military observation base monitoring the Dominion border. Prime Kella stood at the center of the chamber, her transparent skin now showing dark purple patterns that indicated severe distress. Initial reports suggest coordinated attacks by Dominion war fleets. Communications with all three systems have been severed. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures consistent with planetary bombardment. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Planetary bombardment was a concept so alien to Alliance thinking that most species lacked appropriate protocols for response. Their civilization had been built on the assumption that rational beings would choose negotiation over destruction. Admiral Zenth activated tactical displays showing the estimated size and composition of the Dominion forces. Intelligence suggests 12 battle fleets participated in the attacks. Each fleet contains approximately 200 vessels, including heavy cruisers, destroyer squadrons, and support craft. The coordinated nature of the assault indicates months of preparation. Torres studied the tactical data with growing unease. The Alliance military doctrine emphasized defensive formations designed to protect civilian populations while diplomatic solutions were negotiated. Their fleet deployments assumed that any conflict would begin with formal declarations and progress through established escalation protocols. What was the Dominion's stated reason for the attacks? Asked Secretary General Adams. None, Prime Keller replied. No declaration of war, no territorial demands, no diplomatic communications. The attacks began without warning and appeared designed to inflict maximum damage rather than achieve strategic objectives. The human delegation exchanged glances that did not go unnoticed by the Alliance observers. While other species struggled to understand motivations for such apparently irrational behavior, the humans seemed to recognize something familiar in the Dominion's actions. Have you attempted to re-establish communications with the Dominion leadership? Torres asked. Our diplomatic channels remain open, Prime Keller responded. However, their representatives have refused to acknowledge our request for dialogue. Their only message was a demand for unconditional surrender of all Alliance territories within their claimed sphere of influence. The scope of the demand sent shockwaves through the Alliance Council. The Dominion was essentially demanding the dissolution of a civilization that had existed for 3 millennia. It was beyond aggressive. It was genocidal in its implications. Commander Zenth began outlining Alliance response protocols. We will deploy defensive fleets to protect our remaining border worlds while attempting to negotiate a ceasefire. Our military strategists recommend establishing defensive perimeters around core systems and evacuating civilian populations from vulnerable colonies. Torres found herself standing before she realized she intended to speak. Admiral, with respect. Defensive positioning against an enemy willing to conduct planetary bombardment is a strategy for prolonging defeat, not achieving victory. The chamber fell silent. No one had spoken of victory in the context of military conflict within Alliance space for centuries. The concept seemed almost barbaric in its implications. General Torres, Prime Keller said carefully, the Alliance does not pursue military victory. We seek resolution through negotiation and compromise. The Dominion has already demonstrated that they have no interest in negotiation, Torres replied. Their opening move was to destroy 3 of your worlds without warning. This is not a diplomatic crisis. This is a war. The word hung in the air like a curse. War was something that happened to primitive species, not civilized members of the galactic community. The Alliance representatives struggled to process the implications of Torres's statement. Dr. Reed activated his datapad and began pulling up historical analyses. The Dominion's actions follow a pattern consistent with what humans call total war doctrine. They are not attempting to achieve limited objectives through controlled escalation. They are attempting to destroy your capacity to resist. Admiral Zenth's expression showed confusion. But such tactics would result in massive casualties on both sides. No rational species would accept such losses. Rationality is defined by objectives, Torres said grimly. If the Dominion's objective is complete dominance rather than negotiated settlement, then their tactics are perfectly rational from their perspective. The humans spent the next several hours briefing the Alliance Council on concepts that had never been necessary in their peaceful civilization. They explained the difference between limited and total war, the importance of maintaining offensive capabilities, and the strategic value of denying enemy objectives rather than simply protecting friendly assets. The Dominion expects you to respond according to your historical patterns, Torres explained. They have calculated that your defensive posture and diplomatic initiatives will give them time to consolidate their initial gains and prepare for the next phase of attacks. Prime Kella's skin had shifted to deep purple, indicating severe emotional distress. Are you suggesting that we abandon our principles and engage in the same barbaric tactics as the Dominion? I am suggesting that you adapt your tactics to address the reality of your situation, Torres replied. Your principles are meaningless if your civilization is destroyed defending them. The Alliance Council remained deadlocked for hours, with various species arguing for different approaches to the crisis. The Altrians insisted on diplomatic solutions. The Vorthek calculated probability matrices for various defensive strategies, and the Nethri searched historical records for precedents that did not exist. Meanwhile, long-range sensors detected additional Dominion fleet movements toward Alliance space. The enemy was not waiting for negotiations or diplomatic overtures. They were preparing for the next phase of their campaign. Secretary General Adams finally requested permission to address the Council. The Alliance invited Earth to provide fresh perspective on your conflict with the Dominion. We have given you our analysis of the situation and our recommendations for response. The decision of how to proceed remains yours. However, General, Torres added, if you choose to fight this war using traditional Alliance methods, you will lose. The Dominion has studied your civilization for centuries. They know your weaknesses and have planned accordingly. Your only chance of survival is to become something they do not expect. The vote was close, with several species abstaining rather than endorsing what they considered a descent into barbarism. But the reality of burning worlds and silenced colonies ultimately overcame philosophical objections. Prime Kella's announcement came with visible reluctance. The Alliance Council hereby grants emergency military authority to the human delegation. General Torres will assume operational command of Alliance defense forces with full discretion to implement necessary tactical changes. As the Council dispersed, Torres found herself facing the greatest challenge of her career. She had been given command of a military force that had never fought a real war, equipped with technology designed for defense rather than offense. And facing an enemy that had spent decades preparing for this moment, the Alliance had wanted peace, but they had invited Earth to help them fight a war. Now humanity would discover whether their unique experience with conflict could save a civilization that had forgotten how to defend itself. The Alliance War Room had been transformed overnight into something resembling a human military command center. General Torres stood before a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy, with red markers indicating Dominion positions, and blue markers showing Alliance assets. The change was more than cosmetic. It represented a fundamental shift in how the Alliance approached conflict. Commander Zenth watched nervously as human technicians modified Alliance communication systems to handle rapid tactical updates. The Alliance had never needed real-time battlefield coordination, because their conflicts had always been resolved through diplomatic channels. Now they were learning to think in terms of seconds rather than months. The Dominion's greatest advantage is their assumption that we will respond predictably, Torres explained to the assembled Alliance commanders. They have spent decades studying our defensive patterns and diplomatic procedures. Our strategy must be to become unpredictable. The first human-planned operation targeted a Dominion supply convoy traveling between their forward bases and newly conquered territories. Traditional Alliance doctrine would have involved intercepting the convoy with superior firepower and demanding surrender. Instead, Torres proposed something that made the Alliance officers deeply uncomfortable. We will allow the convoy to enter the Vega system, then simultaneously detonate charges placed along their planned route, she explained. The convoy will be destroyed without direct engagement, denying the Dominion both supplies and intelligence about our capabilities. Admiral. Zenth's expression showed the confusion typical of beings raised in a peaceful civilization. But that would be deceptive. The Dominion will not expect such tactics. Exactly, Torres replied. Deception is a fundamental principle of effective warfare. The enemy should never know what you are planning until it is too late to counter it. The operation required Alliance vessels to act as merchant ships, carrying hidden explosive devices into the convoy's path. The deception went against every instinct of the Alliance crews, who had been trained to identify themselves clearly and operate with complete transparency. Captain Rivera of the human contingent personally led the mission, her ship disguised as a damaged freighter requesting assistance. The Dominion escorts responded according to their protocols, approaching to offer aid. The simultaneous detonation of 12 carefully placed charges destroyed the entire convoy in a matter of seconds. The psychological effect on the Dominion was immediate and profound. War leader Karn had expected the Alliance to respond with formal battle formations and diplomatic protests. Instead, an entire supply fleet had simply vanished, leaving no evidence of how or why. The inability to understand their enemy's tactics created uncertainty that spread through the Dominion command structure. Intelligence reports indicate increased Dominion communication traffic, reported Dr. Reed during the post-operation briefing. Their forces are requesting guidance on how to respond to irregular Alliance tactics. They are experiencing something they have never encountered before: doubt. Torres began implementing additional human military concepts that challenged Alliance assumptions about civilized warfare. She established intelligence networks to monitor Dominion communications, developed psychological warfare techniques to undermine enemy morale, and created specialized units trained in what humans called asymmetric warfare. The Alliance officers struggled to adapt to concepts that seemed to contradict their fundamental values. The idea of deliberately misleading an enemy, attacking supply lines instead of military targets, and using fear as a weapon went against everything they had been taught about civilized behavior. These tactics feel wrong, admitted Commander Zenth after reviewing plans for the next operation. We are supposed to be better than this. Better than what? Torres asked. Better than effective? Better than surviving? The Dominion has already demonstrated that they have no interest in civilized behavior. Your choice is to adapt or to maintain your principles while your civilization is destroyed. The second major operation targeted Dominion communication networks rather than military assets. Human teams infiltrated enemy systems and began broadcasting false orders, creating confusion about unit deployments and supply requirements. The Dominion's rigid command structure, designed for overwhelming force projection, proved vulnerable to coordinated misinformation campaigns. Alliance forces began appearing where they were not expected, striking at targets that seemed strategically irrelevant and disappearing before the Dominion could respond. The enemy's advantage in firepower became meaningless when they could not find their opponents or predict their actions. The Dominion is adapting their tactics, reported Captain Rivera after monitoring enemy communications. They are beginning to expect deception and are implementing countermeasures. Torres nodded grimly. Then we escalate. Human military doctrine assumes that the enemy will adapt and requires constant innovation to maintain advantage. The third phase of operations introduced concepts that pushed Alliance moral boundaries even further. Torres proposed targeting Dominion leadership directly, using what humans called decapitation strikes to disrupt enemy command structures. The plan involved assassinating specific individuals. Rather than engaging military units in open combat, the Alliance Council convened an emergency session to debate the proposal. Several species threatened to withdraw their support rather than participate in what they considered murder. The debate raged for hours, with philosophical arguments about the nature of warfare and civilized behavior. We are becoming like them, argued Prime Kella, her skin showing patterns of deep distress. How can we claim moral superiority while employing such tactics? Moral superiority is a luxury that species can afford when their survival is not at stake, Torres replied. The Dominion has already demonstrated their willingness to destroy entire worlds. Your choice is to fight effectively or to die righteously. The vote was even closer than the previous authorization, but practical necessity overcame philosophical objections. The Alliance was losing the war using traditional methods, and the human approach, however distasteful, was producing results. The assassination of Dominion Sub-Commander Krex sent shockwaves through the enemy hierarchy. The strike had been carried out by a single Alliance operative who had infiltrated a Dominion base disguised as a maintenance worker. The psychological impact was enormous. If their leadership was vulnerable, nowhere was safe. War Leader Karn's response was predictably violent. He ordered massive retaliation against Alliance civilian targets, hoping to force a return to conventional warfare. Instead, he played directly into human strategic planning. The Dominion's reaction confirms that our tactics are effective, Torres explained to the Alliance Council. They are abandoning their strategic objectives to pursue emotional responses. This is exactly what we want. The Alliance had learned to fight like humans, but the process had changed them in ways that would be permanent. They had discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed, and had been forced to confront moral questions. Their civilization had avoided for millennia. As reports arrived of successful operations across Alliance space, the broader implications became clear. The Dominion Empire, which had seemed invincible at the beginning of the conflict, was being systematically dismantled by an enemy they could not understand or counter. The war was far from over, but the initiative had shifted. The Alliance was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. The question that remained was whether they could achieve their objectives before the conflict transformed them into something unrecognizable. In the depths of space, Dominion fleets continued their advance toward Alliance core worlds, unaware that their enemy had become something entirely unexpected. The species that had invited Earth to help solve their peace problem had discovered that humans did not solve conflicts through compromise or negotiation. They solved them through victory. The proposal came during a routine strategy meeting delivered in General Torres's characteristically direct manner. The Alliance commanders sat in stunned silence as she outlined the most audacious military operation in galactic history, a direct assault on the Dominion homeworld itself. The enemy's industrial capacity is concentrated on Dominion Prime, Torres explained, manipulating the holographic display to show the heavily fortified system. Every ship, every weapon, every strategic decision originates from this single world. If we can neutralize their command structure and production facilities, the war ends. Admiral Zent's expression reflected the horror that most Alliance officers felt at the suggestion. You are proposing to attack their homeworld? The civilian population alone numbers in the billions. I am proposing to end this war, Torres replied calmly. The Dominion has demonstrated that they will continue fighting until they achieve total victory or total defeat. Prolonging the conflict serves no one's interests. The Alliance Council had been transformed by months of warfare. Species that had once debated the ethics of deception now discussed planetary assault with grim pragmatism. The gentle philosophers and patient diplomats had been replaced by beings who understood that survival sometimes required terrible choices. Prime. Kella's skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated resignation rather than distress. The Alliance has already crossed lines we never imagined we would cross. If this operation can end the war, then we must consider it. The planning phase required resources and coordination on a scale that challenged even human organizational capabilities. The Alliance had to assemble its scattered fleets, coordinate with resistance movements in occupied territories, and maintain absolute secrecy about their intentions. Captain Rivera worked with Alliance intelligence officers to map the Dominion's defensive networks. The enemy homeworld was protected by automated defense platforms, patrol fleets, and massive shield generators that could theoretically withstand direct assault by conventional forces. Their defenses are designed to repel frontal attacks, Rivera reported. Multiple layers of detection grids, interlocking fields of fire, and backup systems that activate automatically if primary defenses are compromised. Dr. Reed had been studying Dominion psychology and social structure, searching for weaknesses that military force alone could not exploit. Their society is built on the assumption of military superiority. They have never experienced defeat on their own territory. The psychological impact of a successful attack could be more devastating than the physical damage. Torres nodded, understanding the implications. We are not just attacking their military capabilities. We are attacking their fundamental beliefs about their own invincibility. The operation began with a series of coordinated feints designed to draw Dominion forces away from their homeworld. Alliance fleets appeared to be massing for attacks on industrial centers, communication hubs, and supply depots throughout Dominion space. The enemy responded predictably, deploying their mobile forces to defend against threats that would never materialize. Meanwhile, the actual assault fleet approached Dominion Prime through a route that should have been impossible. Human navigation. Specialists had identified gravitational anomalies that created temporary corridors through what appeared to be empty space. The Alliance fleet traveled through regions that Dominion sensors could not monitor, emerging directly into the enemies. Home system. The battle was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Dominion's defensive systems had been designed to repel organized attacks by conventional forces. They were unprepared for the fluid, adaptive tactics that humans had taught the Alliance military. Alliance vessels did not engage in traditional formation combat. Instead, they moved in small, independent groups that struck at specific targets and immediately withdrew. The Dominion's massive defensive platforms found themselves unable to track enemies that refused to present organized targets. Enemy response. Patterns indicate confusion and lack of coordination, reported Commander Zenth from the Alliance flagship. Their defensive systems are designed for engagement scenarios that we are not providing. Torres watched the tactical displays with the calm intensity of someone who had seen warfare evolve from primitive conflicts to galactic-scale operations. Maintain pressure on their communication networks. Force them to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. The psychological warfare component of the operation proved as effective as the physical assault. Alliance broadcasts began appearing on Dominion communication channels, showing their supposedly invincible fleets being systematically destroyed by an enemy they had underestimated. War leader Karn's final transmission was broadcast across his entire empire. The Alliance has become something we did not expect. They fight like something from our ancient nightmares. We cannot defeat an enemy that we cannot understand. The surrender came not after the Dominion fleet was destroyed, but after their leadership realized that continuation of the war would result in the complete annihilation of their civilization. The Alliance had demonstrated capabilities that rendered traditional military thinking obsolete. Intelligence Officer Dex delivered the final assessment to the Alliance Council. The humans have changed the fundamental nature of warfare. They do not merely fight. They understand conflict at a level that allows them to reshape it according to their will. The aftermath of the war created challenges that no one had anticipated. The Alliance had achieved decisive victory, but the process had transformed them into something their own people barely recognized. The gentle confederation of peaceful species had become a military power capable of projecting force across the galaxy. Secretary General Adams addressed the Alliance Council during the post-war reorganization sessions. We came here as guests seeking to join your peaceful civilization. We never intended to transform you into warriors. The silence that followed. Her words reflected the complex emotions of species grappling with their new reality. The Alliance had survived, but they were no longer the same beings who had invited Earth to share their peaceful wisdom. The question we face now, Adams continued, is what kind of civilization we choose to become. We have proven that we can fight when necessary. The challenge is ensuring that we only fight when there is no alternative. The Dominion Empire's surrender had created a power vacuum that required careful management. Their former territories contained billions of beings who had known only military rule for generations. The Alliance faced the unprecedented challenge of integrating a warrior culture into their peaceful confederation. General Torres proposed the establishment of what she called the Galactic Defense Force, a permanent military organization capable of responding to future threats. The galaxy is vast and contains many species we have not yet encountered. Some of them may prove hostile. We must be prepared. The proposal generated intense debate among Alliance members. Some species argued that maintaining military forces would inevitably lead to their use, creating conflicts that diplomacy might otherwise prevent. Others recognized that their recent experience had demonstrated the necessity of being able to defend their values through force when required. Prime Kella's assessment proved decisive. We have learned that peace is not a natural state. It must be actively protected by those capable of defending it. The humans have shown us that strength and wisdom are not mutually exclusive. The Alliance voted to establish humanity as the galaxy's primary military authority. With Earth serving as the headquarters for the new defense force, it was a responsibility that no human had sought, but one that circumstances had made necessary. The integration of former Dominion territories proceeded slowly and carefully. Alliance diplomats worked with local leaders to establish democratic institutions, while human military advisors helped train new security forces committed to defensive rather than aggressive doctrine. Captain Rivera found herself commanding a mixed-species fleet that patrolled the outer reaches of Alliance space, monitoring for potential threats from unknown civilizations. "We are not conquerors," she explained to her diverse crew. "We are guardians. Our purpose is to ensure that peace remains possible for those who choose it." The transformation was not without costs. Several Alliance species struggled to adapt to their new reality, and some individuals chose to leave the Confederation rather than accept what they considered militarization of their peaceful society. The Nethri established isolated colonies where they could maintain their traditional ways, while smaller groups sought refuge in remote systems. Dr. Reed established the Institute for Conflict Resolution, where Alliance members could study human military history and develop their own approaches to defensive strategy. "Understanding warfare does not mean embracing it," he taught his students. "Knowledge of conflict allows us to prevent it through strength rather than hope." The first major test of the new galactic order came when long-range scouts detected an aggressive species expanding toward Alliance territory from the galactic core. The hegemony, as they called themselves, had conquered dozens of worlds and showed no interest in peaceful contact. The Alliance response demonstrated how thoroughly they had learned human lessons. Instead of waiting for the hegemony to attack Alliance worlds, the Defense Force established defensive positions along likely invasion routes. When the enemy fleet arrived, they found not helpless targets but prepared defenders who had studied their tactics and developed appropriate countermeasures. The hegemony's defeat was swift and decisive, but more importantly, it was achieved without the massive casualties that had characterized the Dominion War. The Alliance had learned to project strength in ways that discouraged aggression rather than simply responding to it after the fact. Years passed and the Alliance settled into its new role as a galactic power. Earth had become the hub of a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds, with human military doctrine adapted by dozens of species to meet their particular needs and circumstances. Children grew up learning both the principles of peaceful cooperation and the realities of defensive necessity. Alliance schools taught diplomatic solutions as the preferred approach to conflict, while also ensuring that students understood the importance of maintaining the capability to defend their values. The memorial erected on Concordia honored the millions who had died during the Dominion War, but its inscription reflected the lessons learned. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice and the will to defend it. Secretary General Adams, now elderly but still sharp, delivered the dedication speech. "We invited Earth to join our peaceful civilization, and in doing so, we discovered that true peace requires more than good intentions. It requires the strength to protect what we have built and the wisdom to use that strength responsibly." As night fell over Concordia, the lights of the Defense Force headquarters glowed steadily against the darkness. Somewhere in the depths of space, human officers worked alongside their alien colleagues, monitoring communication channels and scanning for potential threats. The Alliance had wanted peace, and they had achieved it. But they had learned that peace was not a gift to be received, but a responsibility to be earned. The species that had once believed in the inevitability of peaceful coexistence now understood that their civilization existed because they were willing and able to defend it. The galaxy slept peacefully, protected by those who had learned that the price of peace was eternal vigilance and the courage to pay it when necessary.